More than 3 million people globally have now died from COVID-19 as governments work to vaccinate everyone. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. The United States continues to lead the world with the highest number of deaths from COVID-19. To date, more than 567,000 Americans have died. But there is a sliver of hope. Every U.S. adult is now eligible for a vaccine, and according to the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, more than 131 million Americans have received at least one dose. On Friday, a review panel will meet to discuss the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which was paused after reports of a rare and severe type of blood clot in 6 women. Across Europe, France and Italy remain in lockdown after a third deadly surge of the coronavirus, but Italy announced it will ease some restrictions next week, allowing for outdoor dining. The United Kingdom is also starting to reopen after a 3-month lockdown. Hospitalizations in Britain are at the lowest rate since last summer. For more now on the coronavirus pandemic, let's bring in our panel. Joining us now from Paris, France, is Erin Zaleski. She's a journalist and contributor to the Daily Beast. Also with us from the United Kingdom is Chris Smith. He's a consultant virologist at the University of Cambridge and presenter of the Naked Scientists podcast. From North Carolina, Dr. Krishna Udaykumar is the founding director of the Duke Global Health Innovation Center. And Hilary Brick is a senior health and science reporter for Business Insider in New York. Thanks to all of you for being with us. And Hilary, let me start with you, and let's start with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, because that's the one that's been making news. And as I said, that's because 6 women have suffered blood clots in their brain. What can you tell us about this pause, and when is the vaccine expected to go back into use?
Yeah, well, we don't know yet exactly what's going to happen, but on Friday, the advisory panel to the Centers for Disease Control Prevention is going to meet again, and I've talked to 4 members of that panel, and they all said, you know, they don't have much appetite for continuing the pause past Friday, so they really want to come to a decision then. And I think they're just hoping to have a little more data. You know, they had those 6 cases last time they met, but they're hoping now that another week has passed that maybe there'll be a few more to look at. And it sounds like, from what we heard from the director of the CDC today at the White House, that indeed there could be a few more. And if the pattern persists, and it looks like most of these cases are in women, you know, ages 18 to roughly 50, then perhaps they could do something like just recommend the shot to men or to older adults. But all of the members of the panel are still pretty hesitant to say what they might do. They really want to be able to look at that data and make a really data-driven decision on Friday.
Hilary, how big a setback is this, not just for Johnson & Johnson, but for the rollout program in the United States? And of course, we shouldn't forget that this vaccine is also being used in other parts of the world.
Yeah, so in the U.S., you know, obviously we have Moderna and Pfizer, but there are other countries like South Africa where this is the only vaccine that's in use. And so I think it's a little bit more of a setback there. But you know, we already have 25% of the population in the U.S. fully vaccinated, so I don't know how much of a setback this is going to be, especially because it seems like the appetite from the panel is to continue using the shot, just perhaps with some new warnings or advice about how best to use it. So I think for the U.S., this will be more of like a vote of confidence in the safety system really working, but we'll have to see what they decide.
Okay, Dr. Krishna Udaykumar, the United States has now opened vaccinations to all Americans 16 and older, yet we're still seeing a number of infections. In fact, it's averaging 70,000 new cases a day. How concerned should we be about this, and at what point do you think we could see a reversal in this and see a significant drop in the number of infections?
Yeah, I think overall we're doing relatively well. We haven't seen a huge uptick in the 4th wave of massive infections that we had been worried about, especially with the growth of variants in the US. And that's largely because of some of the public health measures and especially vaccination rates. So we are at a bit of a plateau in terms of daily cases. The deaths have also plateaued. Hopefully, will start to come down significantly, especially now that at least half of all adults in the US have received at least one dose of the vaccine. Unfortunately, part of what we've started to see is perhaps a fatigue with the rest of the public health measures that are necessary, loosening up of restrictions before we really get past what is the acute phase of this pandemic. So there is a dangerous period over the coming 2 to 3 months where we still need to be really aggressive in managing from public health measures while we're getting more and more vaccines administered to the public.
Dr. Uday Kumar, are we seeing that in many parts of the United States, people are simply ignoring the restrictions or not willing to comply at all?
I think what we've seen is that it's a variable approach, that state by state, there are different levels of restrictions or mandates. And people are getting tired. It's been more than a year of this. They're starting to see that people that have been vaccinated are able to start doing a bit more. So it's understandable that people are getting frustrated. We're getting into the springtime. So I think the real message is that we're close, but we're not there. So we need to wait a few more weeks, a couple more months, and continue to be really aggressively focused on the vaccination campaigns.
Right, Erin, let's talk about the situation in Europe. Europe is experiencing a third wave, and several European countries, including France, have extended their lockdowns. At least 100,000 people have died in France from COVID. What is the situation in Paris, where you are right now?
Well, that's correct. We're in the middle of the third lockdown, which was applied in earlier this month. There's talk that it will be the restrictions will start to be lifted next month, either early May or mid-May, but that hasn't been confirmed yet. Again, as previously mentioned, there's a huge in Paris, and I think in the country in general, there's a huge what you could describe as a lockdown fatigue and a COVID fatigue in general. For instance, the restaurants and bars have been closed since October, so that's 6 months without restaurants and bars, which is such a crucial part of French culture. So I feel like people are exhausted and they've had it, and that could be part of the reason that not everyone has followed the lockdown rules.
And is the healthcare system, Erin, able to cope with what's going on right now?
Well, yes, but they're feeling a strain. And because the vaccine rollout has been so slow, it fortunately has been picking up in the past couple of weeks, but it's been so slow compared to the US, compared to the UK, compared to its other European neighbors, that there's concern that the vaccine is not keeping pace with keeping the COVID infections under control.
And what about schools, Erin? Have they reopened?
No, they have not reopened, but they should be. Right now, France is in its spring holidays, and those are about to conclude on Monday, next Monday. So I believe that they will be reopening then.
All right, Dr. Chris Smith, there is one country in Europe that's been bucking the trend, and that is the United Kingdom, where you are right now. It's reopened businesses, shops, pubs, hair salons have reopened as well. The British Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, credits the lockdown for saving lives. This is what he had to say. Let's listen.
Yes, of course, the vaccination programme has helped, but the bulk of the work in reducing the disease has been done by the lockdown. So, as we unlock, the result will inevitably be that we will see more infection. Sadly, we will see more hospitalisation and deaths. And people have just got to understand that.
Chris, 60% of British adults have received their first dose. Is this safe to reopen all these businesses, to reopen the country?
I think it is. And in fact, myself, other commentators and other authorities have actually disputed what the Prime Minister said. We're not sure why he said what he said, because actually we've got quite a lot of evidence now that the vaccines are incredibly effective. In fact, they've really surprised many people. When you look at the graph of how many cases, how many admissions to hospital, how many deaths, and you plot the graph of people who've been vaccinated and people who haven't, there's a clear difference. In fact, the evidence we now have, and in fact this is corroborated by independent evidence in another country, and that's Israel, we're seeing perhaps a 70% reduction in transmissions of virus in vaccinated individuals. So actually, most of the heavy lifting has been done historically by lockdowns, very blunt instruments, very, very costly on many levels. But now we're into a regime where the vaccine really is bearing fruit.
Right,
we're not like we were last year. And the key distinction this time is that while we're opening things up, we're not opening them up with a population that's left vulnerable like it was before. We're opening them up with a population where, in fact, 99% of the people who are in the most vulnerable categories have now been offered or received vaccines. And as a result, we think that the likelihood of this translating into cases that translate themselves into hospital admissions and mortalities is much, much lower. So we're going into this with a much greater degree of confidence now.
So relatively speaking, Chris, then the vaccine rollout in the United Kingdom has been pretty successful.
Well, you could argue that it's been very fast, it's been very slick, and it's been dynamic. One of the adjustments that was made when we realized we had to confront this big escalation in cases in January, we were having effectively a wave before Europe has now entered its third wave. The government made the decision, quite an audacious one at the time, and against much, much hostility, and many people saying they shouldn't do it, but to lengthen the period between jabs from about a month to 3 months. Many people said it was the wrong decision, but actually it was based on the fact that the more people who could access at least one dose of vaccine as fast as possible when the cases were at their greatest, and therefore your chance of catching the infection by running into somebody who could infect you was greatest. That's actually translated into an excellent strategy and has helped to achieve such high vaccination rates. I've had 2 doses of the vaccine, so I should be, as Boris Johnson said last year, bursting with antibodies now. I guess I'll find out in a couple of weeks' time.
Hillary, let's get back to the situation here in the United States. There are now at least 21 states that have reported at least a 10% rise in COVID infections. In the state of Michigan, hospitals there are at capacity, and the governor of that state, Gretchen Whitmer, she imposed strict restrictions back in March of last year, but has not taken any action this time. The CDC says Michigan needs to shut down. What is the situation there?
Yeah, so it's a little bit of a tricky situation because it's not totally clear why Michigan is in such a hard place right now. And I was actually speaking to one of the leading infectious disease experts here in the U.S. earlier today, who said that he thinks Michigan is actually going to be a harbinger of what could happen in other states very soon. So I guess time will tell. But sort of what our colleague was saying in the UK, you know, there's not a lot of appetite for strong lockdowns right now, whether you're in Paris or England or the US. So I think it's going to be up to the experts to get smart about, you know, reminding us of the precautions we need to be taking as more people are getting vaccinated, but also getting smart about when and where and why to, you know, wear your mask, where not to go, you know, being out in public in a crowd, maybe not smart, but going outside, you know, that can be okay. So I think at this point in the pandemic, it's going to become really important to teach people how to be smart with the virus and be able to do a little bit more, because there's just no appetite for a strict lockdown.
Dr. Krishna Uday-Kumar, I'd like to get your view on the effectiveness of the vaccines we've been using so far. Pfizer, in fact, says that people will likely need a 3rd shot within 12 months of getting fully vaccinated. I mean, how long do these vaccines last? How effective are they? And should we assume that we would need a booster shot every year like we do with the flu vaccine?
Yeah, what we know so far is that they are incredibly effective. If you look at the clinical trials, very high levels of efficacy as well as safety. If you look at the real-world data from the UK, from Israel, and from others, incredibly effective in real life at significantly reducing infections, certainly hospitalizations and deaths. What we don't know really is fully the duration of immunity. We know that from natural immunity after having an infection, the immune response may wane after some number of months. We don't fully know that yet either. We don't know yet from vaccines how long we may be protected. We, for contingency planning purposes, are certainly thinking about what it might mean to get a booster dose in the fall or winter this year, as well as for several seasons. The other thing we don't know is, as more variants develop, whether we may need other vaccines that cover new variants that aren't going to be as susceptible to the current generation of vaccines. So the variants, as well as the duration of immunity, are the two really critical issues that are going to tell us how often we may need to be vaccinated going forward. And we know that just to cover the world's population now, we've already got to ramp up vaccine manufacturing incredibly based on a baseline of what it used to be. And if that ends up becoming 2, 3, 4x, then we've got real serious capacity challenges.
Dr. Chris Smith, what are your thoughts on the booster shot? And I presume research continues on this vaccine.
Cynics said Pfizer are just looking after their share price. It would be in their interest to say everyone needs another dose, wouldn't it? No, I mean, I'm being cynical myself. We just don't know, to be honest with you. We know that natural immunity to coronavirus is not long-lived. We also have data from what's called the REACT-2 study in England, where researchers at Imperial College last year followed up some 1/3 or more people. And they looked in these groups of random individuals more than once. They compared periods 3 months apart and found that about 25% fewer people were testing positive for antibody after a 3-month period, having been naturally infected with coronavirus. That suggests that there is a diminuendo in our ability to detect antibody, but we don't know if that naturally translates into a resusceptibility either to just catching coronavirus or catching a severe dose of coronavirus. It's tempting to suspect that although we might be able to catch the infection if we get a low level of antibody again, we might not become severely unwell with it, but you could nevertheless pass it on to somebody else. All of these unknowns we will solve, because by reaching high levels of population immunity, both through natural infection, but also the lion's share of that now thanks to vaccination, there will be people who begin to be infected in that group. We're following them up. We'll learn, but we have to do the experiment. So it's going to take a number of months yet before we're really in the position to answer these questions.
Aaron, the French government is also taking other measures. In fact, they are imposing restrictions on people who can travel to France. Right now, travelers from Argentina, Brazil, Chile, and South Africa will have to quarantine for 10 days. Yeah. What can you tell us about this? And what about travel within Europe as well?
Right now, yes, what you said was correct. The government has just imposed a quarantine on those 4 countries. There's a concern about the variants circulating in those areas now. I think it was rooted in that. Travel is still, even for people within France, travel is not permitted. I think you need a very specific reason to be traveling. The leisure travel is sort of not on the table right now. People are hoping that will change next month. The vacations in France, particularly the summer vacations, are sacred here. So there's hope that that will change, but again, that nothing has been decided or confirmed. Macron did, in an interview, I believe it was yesterday or the day before, with an American station, say that the country was preparing to open up the summer to American travelers again. That's been more than a year, but there will be requirements. He spoke about vaccinated Americans, or people who can prove vaccination, could be welcomed back into the country again.
Chris Smith, you know, we were talking earlier on about the problems that people have been having with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. What about AstraZeneca? It, in fact, was one of the first vaccines where doctors encountered problems. What is the status of that vaccine now?
Well, actually, I speculated when this first began to emerge that perhaps we would see history repeating itself with a number of the other vaccine products. The reason being, that AstraZeneca is not the only show in town which is a vaccine based on a modified virus. The Sputnik vaccine that the Russians have developed is also a brace of modified cold viruses, a bit similar to AstraZeneca's vaccine. The Johnson & Johnson single-shot vaccine is a modified cold virus and therefore also very similar to the AstraZeneca adenovirus. The situation is that obviously the image of that vaccine has taken something of a battering. It's already been quite abused across Europe by a number of senior politicians, with Emmanuel Macron saying it was quasi-ineffective in the over 65s for some bizarre reason. But the thing is, what's happened is that we're in a situation where there probably is a real effect. There probably is evidence for a link between use of this class of vaccines and developing this rare brain blood clotting abnormality. But that complication rate is extremely low. It's about 1 per million. And if you contrast that with, well, how often does this happen in the general population anyway? Well, about 10 people in every million get that complication just by chance. And if you smoke or if you take the oral contraceptive pill, you probably raise the prospect of that happening about tenfold. So actually, we've got a situation where the vaccine is a safer option than either catching COVID, because that also increases the risk of this happening, or taking a drug/medicine that many, many women take every single day without ever having given this a thought. It's a very rare complication.
Right, and Chris, very briefly, the European Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, she is hoping that the entire bloc will be vaccinated by the end of the summer. Is that realistic?
They've got a very long way to go, although they are accelerating and scaling up. And remember, we've got other vaccine products joining the party now, because alongside Pfizer and AstraZeneca's products, Moderna has had their vaccine authorized. The EMA, the European Medicines Agency, are in conversation actually about the Sputnik vaccine to see if they can get product from Russia. And we also have Valneva and Novavax, 2 other products coming on stream quite soon as well. So soon we'll have an embarrassment of riches of vaccines almost. So I think there's every likelihood, with the motivation behind this and the evidence of success, this is working, that many countries will end up in a position with the majority of their most vulnerable, if not everyone, protected by the end of the summer.
Hillary, here in the United States, as we are all aware, both the pandemic and the vaccination rollout has been politicized. There are large segments of the population who've said that they will not take this vaccine. They don't trust it. Some estimates put it as many as 1/3 of the eligible adult population who will not take it. If that is the case, what happens to herd immunity then?
Yeah, I think it's really tough to say right now. If you remember back when none of the vaccines were authorized yet, there were many Americans who said, you know, I don't know what this vaccine is, I don't want to take it. And what we've seen is a lot of that hesitancy has gone away as people's friends and family and doctors all get vaccinated and they see that it's safe. So I think it is a little bit too soon to say, especially, you know, if Johnson & Johnson does come back on the scene, then there will be a one-shot vaccine for people to take if they decide that they want to. But that being said, the hesitancy rates, especially among GOP Republican men, do seem to be strikingly high. I think Mitch McConnell said something about it last week and said, you know, I'm a Republican man and I got vaccinated, trying to sort of like encourage his peers to do so. But yeah, there does seem to be sort of a stubborn element there, and I'm not sure if that will last or how long it will last.
Right. Mitch McConnell, of course, is the minority leader, the Republican minority leader in the U.S. Senate. Dr. Uday Kumar, what are your thoughts on herd immunity in the United States?
Yeah, I think we're going to have to do a much more aggressive job in looking at vaccine hesitancy and ensuring that we have greater levels of vaccine confidence than we currently do. It's exactly right that the levels of hesitancy are starting to come down as we roll out vaccinations, but the latest numbers still are that 20% of the American population would say that they would either never get it or only if they were required to do so, and up to another 17% that still are saying they want to wait and see based on the latest numbers from the Kaiser Family Foundation. So we're not going to get to herd immunity anytime in the near future with those levels of hesitancy, and that's just in adults. So we're hopeful that at least one of the vaccines will be authorized for use in children 12 and up in the coming weeks to months, and potentially even younger children by the fall and the winter. So I think it's going to be a tough task to reach true herd immunity. So we're going to have to think about contingencies there as well.
And one other point, the UK variant, it's been found in all 50 states right now, according to the CDC. And this is a variant that hits younger people very hard. What do we know about the effectiveness of vaccines against these variants?
Yeah, from what we've seen, the vaccines that we're using here in the U.S., the Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, all seem to be effective against the variants that we're starting to see now. And as you said, the UK variant has now become the dominant strain here in the U.S. We're also worried about the P1 variant that's growing rapidly that originated in Brazil. So in many ways, it has become a race between the vaccination campaign and the variants that seem to be more aggressive in terms of their transmissibility. So right now, I think there's confidence about the current generation of vaccines, but we know that new variants are likely to emerge over time as well.
Right. Erin, you were talking about that interview that the French President Emmanuel Macron did with the United States television network. Well, one of the other things he said during that interview was that he supports the idea of Western nations donating up to 5% of their vaccine stocks to the rest of the world. This is what he said. Let's listen.
And I think between now and June, we have to send a maximum doses of vaccine, which is a tiny part of what we get for us, to vaccinate the workers of the healthcare system in Africa. It's very limited, but these guys are working hard to preserve the health system, and this is something we can do. And same in Latin America. After summer, we will accelerate these deliveries. We will accelerate this solidarity.
So, Erin, given the situation in France right now, how is this proposal being met with in France?
Well, people haven't been particularly critical about it. I mean, I think there's the attitude that, the COVID-19, it's a global virus. And if wealthier countries have the ability to do so, then it's a sort of a responsibility to lend a hand to the more disadvantaged countries.
Chris Smith, we often hear that no one is safe until everyone is safe. And how important is it for this vaccine to get out to developing countries, to get out to the whole world?
Well, the problem is with an infectious disease, they don't need passports, they don't observe borders because they have a habit of spreading regardless because of leaky borders and that kind of thing. So even if we do sweep all the dirt out of our own backyard into the street, unless we clean the street too, the wind will blow it all back. I mean, that's the point. And so therefore there is an interest for all of us in order to basically help the entire world to get rid of coronavirus, because otherwise we will be enslaved by it forever.
Okay, and that's where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That is it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.